Chapter 91, Livelihoods, Part 1. At this time, all over the territory, dozens of people were gathering wood and stone to exchange for some copper. Of course, a lot of them still go outside a couple hours every day to hunt, knowing full well they couldn't be too complacent, even when they're in such good territory. It also helped that a team with an old man, a little girl, and a pregnant woman always went out to train early before dawn, going back well into the morning. This had been happening every day, without exception. Of course, going out to fight monsters wasn't for everyone. For these people, the alternatives for decent livelihood within the walls was something they treasured. Although it was a bit of hard work and manual labor, pretty much everyone had small smiles on their faces. It was really a breath of fresh air. They had not only rested well and bathed well, but they could also earn their keep peacefully without having to risk their lives. As such, even if they worked under the hot sun, no one complained. On the contrary, they had relaxed expressions. However, one young woman had a worried look plastered on her face the entire morning. As she gathered the resources, along with some edible fruits, she couldn't help but give subtle glances at the old woman doing the same, albeit at an evidently much slower pace. When the old woman paused for a moment, the lady dropped what she was holding and ran to her. "Are you all right, Grandma? How's your back?" Cassie asked the older woman worriedly, holding her arms to assist her. "Don't you worry, child," the old woman laughed, not expecting a little pause to induce a panic attack. She gently patted her granddaughter's hand off of her arm. "I hadn't felt back pain for days now. This little thing is nothing." Thankfully, the evolution had indeed helped her physique a lot. She felt alive and now safe, and she definitely wouldn't be able to stay still in the house while her granddaughter worked under the hot sun. Although they were not rich before or after the transfer, they still lived well back then, and she hoped it would be the same here. For now, it seemed very promising. They could now sleep on beds, drink water when needed, and eat decent food. Unlike before, where they could only sleep amongst soil and rocks, it was very scary because there were not only beasts, but there were also so many aggressive bugs and birds in the forest. Some of the people that came with them were killed off by bug poison. Cassie cringed at the memory of her companion's painful death by bug bite. As for the other basic needs, they also struggled very much upon arrival in this new land. They could only drink dew water, which Cassie learned to collect in what she called a camping camp, and even that wasn't easy to collect either, because they lost a lot of dew if monsters appeared unexpectedly. The only thing they didn't struggle as much was the food, because not only was she able to collect a lot back in Terran, her grandmother had the wisdom of the old, and had very good intuition of what was edible. It was around this time they heard rustles coming nearby them, and they flinched by instinct. But they quickly remembered that they were in a safe place. Only harmless critters remained within the walls, and their panic calmed down, though they kept their guards up just in case. They saw a small group of various ages with makeshift baskets on their backs. It was filled with produce. "Amazing, you gathered all of these," Cassie whistled, impressed. "You sure maximized our foraging limit." She was referring to the limit some hoarders experienced first. Understandably, the territory limited the amount of resources a person could forage. "Well, actually, we were approached by rich neighbors to collect stuff for them." "You could do that." "Yeah, but we consume our own limits." "Oh, rich people problems, right?" The teen laughed. "You don't know, just this morning someone was already making plans to furnish their house." His friend couldn't help but supplement. They were talking about the budget. The youngins cackled and proceeded in talking about some rich people and their funny stories. The old woman, Cassia, smiled as she watched the lively interaction of the younger generation. Just a day ago, they were all filled with weakness and tiredness. Now they could talk about random things with strangers they just met. Looking at the tall territory walls, and then the people around laughing and filled with hope, she believed they would continue to do so. Deeper into the territory was Baron's busy workshop. He set up his workshops in both of his farm villas. They used about 2/3 of the fields as a workshop, adding makeshift sheds to protect the workers from the sun. While a little wasteful to use over half of the system fields for a workshop, they really didn't have much of a choice. No other place was big enough. Anyway, Baron's sharp business sense was telling him where to invest, and he found his calling in these industries. And he was right, it had only been more than a day, and his team had been flooded with work. For one, the customized special fit-out projects, all with Ms. Althea's team, already took all of his highest skilled workers. Other than these, Baron also had a separate production team for less specialized items, which required considerably less skill. Of course, the number of workers in his hand, which was nearly a score of people, was really no joke. Especially, he had only been in the territory for 2 days. As for how he managed to find so many carpenters and workers, it was mostly down to his boundless charm, which Ms. Sheila seemed to be blind to, for now, and also luck. Okay, there was also the fact that there were less than 200 people in the entire territory, concentrated in very few living zones. Everyone was bound to know everybody else. Because of this, it was fairly easy for him to get hires and form partnerships by being a little friendly. One of the survivor team happened to be in a construction site. There was even an architect with them, though he refused to work for him. Anyway, this less specialized team of fabricators focused on the most basic furniture, mostly beds, chairs, and tables. So far, the line was enough for them to work overtime for the following week. As the greats had said, the businessman who takes the first step takes the most profit. He could almost smell the profit coming in. He estimated he would have the return on his huge investment within a week. His business in Terran had never been so good. Chapter 92, Livelihood Part 2. Baron nodded in satisfaction as he stared at the marvelous status of his workshop 1. Humming happily, he then walked out of the gate and went to his second workshop. As he entered, he was met with sharp eyes that almost made him run for his life, until he remembered who it was and he stopped his tracks. Clearing his throat and slowly turning around, he faced the greeting person head-on. It was a woman in her late 60s, but she was scarier than the gangsters he'd seen. It was Sassy the Tanner, the old expert of an obsolete art he managed to convince to work with him, for a good share of the profit, of course. It was amazing someone still knew how to do it, since back in Terran hunting had been mostly illegal, and people opted for synthetic leather already. He flinched a little at the old woman's stoic stare. She was looking him down, arms crossed, and very intimidating. He put up an awkward smile. "Good afternoon, Sassy." The woman grunted at him, not caring for any nonsense. He cleared his throat, getting on topic. "Are we on schedule?" he asked, looking at the various soon-to-be leather that were drying in the yard. The whole yard smelled pungent, with a mix of earthiness and astringency. There were dozens of workers absorbed in activities, with various tools made of animal bones lying around. There were makeshift bone knives, hammers, and some other tools he couldn't name. A number of workers were standing over a wooden trough filled with water mixed with other stuff, their sleeves rolled up, and mixing the bubbling concoction. This concoction was made by Sassy herself. Apparently, she got a skill called appraisal, which helped her figure out the various alternatives to her old plants. It was amazing. He'd have complimented her if she hadn't been so scary. Anyway, he looked at the hides that were stretched taut on wooden frames. Some of them were being brought to the concoction. "Looks like we are on schedule," he said, answering his own question. The old woman nodded. "We'll need to refill the raw materials." "The stocks should be coming any time now," Baron said. Speaking of raw materials, other than buying hides from the fighters, there were also loggers who sold their wood to him. After all, the territory expressly prohibited cutting trees within it, and replacing the cut trees with seedlings for the trees within a kilometer outside. He could even foresee jobs, specializing in replanting. Of course, these loggers would need protection, so they often went out with groups of fighters. The most popular was one led by a dude named Drake. In any case, Baron's business mind could already see the potential of these models. Without a doubt, a lot of these collectors would soon form the first rudimentary market in the territory. And Baron was dead set on occupying a good place in it. While there were some already planning on how to get rich inside the territory, there were also some who wished to get stronger, aiming to fight not for the hide or their meat, but mostly for the experience. "Aren't you baiting too many?" a man with fluffy red hair yelled at his brunette friend. Their party of 7 were now running from a mob of 30. They had similar features to mole rats, only they were green and slimy. Troy rolled his eyes, pulling on a wooden sword he bought from the territory. How was he supposed to know they nested underground? "It's fine, just run towards the walls if we can't take it anymore," one of the 2 girls in the group yelled. She was cute and petite, but she was tough as nails. Fred swooned. My Lulu is so smart. Of course, she said proudly, aiming an arrow at a monster, though the arrowhead stuck on its scale. And who's your Lulu? My Lulu, don't be rude, don't take after your cousin. Fight, another yelled, pulling their attentions back to the enemies aiming to freaking eat them, all while shooting some arrows behind him as they fled. But after running for a while, they realized there was something wrong. We should be at the wall by now, Fred yelled, looking around. He turned to his companions. Who led the team? It was Troy. Damn it, it's like you don't know he had a non-existent sense of direction. Troy gasped, offended. Hey, how rude. Anyway, Lulu screamed, these idiots, focus. Thankfully, they reached the wall on time, and the sentries attacked right on schedule, one shot every 3 seconds. Heaving a breath of relief, the backs further inwards, and attacking the monsters get past the sentries. Stab, Troy called out a skill he got, like a dweeb. Stab, stab. Fred rolled his eyes, but otherwise did not have the time to mock him. He was busy defending his own appendages. Fred and the others slashed and slashed, making sure not to accidentally enter the sentry's shooting path. There may not have been any innocent sentry victims as of yet, and they certainly didn't want to be the first ones. Just attract them all within the sentry's scopes. They're bound to get hit eventually. The group started baiting mobs to the circlement. The sentry towers didn't shoot subsequently, as there was a few seconds to cool down each shot, but this was enough for them to safely mob a few monsters at a time and help each other level up. Of course, some rivalries was unavoidable with certain manchildren, trying to one-up the other. It got to the point where they very nearly got into an accident. Watch out, Fred paled as Troy accidentally changed positions just after the sentry shot an arrow, and he went directly at its path. Will Troy be the first innocent victim of the sentry tower? Luckily, Troy was a bit clumsy and lost footing, and he fell back first on the ground, the sharp arrow narrowly missing his nose. Fook, that was too close. Fred cackled, though it was mostly in relief, not that he'd ever admit it. H-A-H-H-H-A, you're lucky your nose is so flat. H-A-H-H-H-H-A. Shut up. Lulu's temper finally exploded. Shut you pee, don't you see you're still weaklings? How could you be so careless? She yelled. Joke around when you can one-shot these damned monsters. The two man-children finally behaved, focusing on the task at hand. They did this all day long, leveling up under the protection of Althea, gathering strength. All this in the hopes of eventually joining the ranks of the strong of their territory, and carving a good life for themselves with their own fists. Chapter 93, for the economy. While various citizens were doing what they could to gather stable income, their lord was also thinking about how to get the economy running as quickly and efficiently. She was chewing something sweet again, a lollipop she was reserving for her Barbies. Unfortunately, her cravings seemed to be on the sweet side, and her self-restraint cracked at the need for sugar. It had been less than a week, and she had consumed a good part of the sweets she hoarded. Fruits were fine, but their variety was so small, she got sick of them fairly quickly. This was very bad news, distressing even. When would they find sugar? How could her children live without it? It wasn't that she hadn't tried extracting sugar from the fruits, but the process was extremely cumbersome, and the sugar in the local fruits really wasn't much. Not to mention, fruits required to gather sugar, even if it was a high-sugar fruit, which they weren't, would still be a lot more in quantity than, say, from other sources like sugar cane. Sigh, what a tragedy. Anyway, she pulled herself back to the topic at hand and took a look at her stats. Territory stats. Status, level 1 village. Area, 3,142,000 square meters. Residents, 64, 13 permanent, 51 temporary. Total population, 313. Base resources. Wood, 925,000. Stone, 653,000. Money, 7302 gold, 91,467 silver, 37,007 copper. Reputation, 20. Buildings, village center, weaponry shop, defensive wall, warehouse, farms. Bonus building, custom building. Building slots 5+1. She wanted to build industrial areas where the lush resources would be processed to finished products. However, she didn't have a building slot anymore. Even if she did, she would not waste it on this function. Too bad the custom building couldn't be used. One was the column spacing was impractical, and second, the custom building had to have some residential use. Even the commercial modules she built had to have residences somewhere, usually on the second floor. Not to mention, there was also the utilities infrastructure that she should be planning while the territory was still young. Thinking about it for a while, she opened up the Lord panel. She opened the announcement tab and made a post in the name of the system. Announcement: the territory is hiring as many strongmen in construction to further develop the territory. Requirement: experience in construction work. Wages: 50 copper day labor. 80 copper day foremen. 150 copper day technical talents, architects and engineers. Please submit your resume at the village center. She made similar announcements for territory hires for consistency. Announcement: the territory is hiring people to maintain cleanliness in the territory. Requirement: working body. Wages: 40 copper day labor. Please submit your resume at the village center. Althea saw this as an opportunity to further liven up the economy, including those that she and Baron would hire. Pretty much the majority of the population would be able to get comfortable salaries. The construction in and of itself would also contribute, as there would be more industries that would pop up when there were more building types available. Speaking of the Constitution team, she had seen that there were actually a few former construction workers and an architect in the 300+ people currently in the territory. If she would get a civil engineer or two, she could have a complete team. She turned at Eugene, who had been playing with Theodore during his break time. Eugene, you will temporarily lead the production of blueprints after we finalize the tools. She paused. They weren't producing paper now, and it would be a pity to use paper too much, as only Eugene actually stocked up on a few rims. Speaking of which, when paper was mass-produced, she decided to sell a plant guide, so the resources could be gathered by the people as well. This way, the ready resources around, inside and outside the territory, would be maximized. A sheet is fine. Eugene smiled at her stingy appearance. It's not a priority, but since we're doing conventional construction, it may take a while, so the sooner we start the better. I'll make an inventory of the materials to start, Eugene said, before gesturing to go. He still remembered the plethora of materials he briefly learned about when they were designing the custom house. Thanks, she said, we're counting on you. Outside of their villa, the moment the announcements were made, the territory boiled. Jobs. The salary is so good. I was a mason before. I can totally clean well, I'm a proud over-compulsive, someone said, referring to the second job offering. The second job naturally wasn't popular to the young people. Even those who were poor in Terran. This was their chance to start over, and not let their poor education hinder their living well. How could they take such a job? However, many old people who didn't have much options, as well as young kids, found this to be very much in line with their current capabilities. In any case, there weren't any residents that weren't talking about the job openings, with the tourists listening in and asking for news. One such person was Nina, who was a visitor simply because she couldn't afford any other residency options, who told her to be an utter modern kid with all their savings in digital form. Hearing that there were job openings that were paying well, still in her field of study, she naturally got excited. I'm an architecture student. The person beside her who had been gathering resources looked at her very impressed and a bit of envy. Really, that's great, you should try it. Things had not yet calmed down when, not long after that, the citizen-made announcement made by Sheila also resounded across the territory. If the territory hiring came as a pleasant surprise, the citizen-made announcement made them dumbfounded. There were so many openings, everyone would have jobs at this point, right? There were requirements for farmers, labor, seamstress, medical professionals, cooks, waiters, craftsmen, artists, and many more. What about those who would gather resources, who'd do those hard jobs? Then they remembered there were still millions of Terrans around. Let the newcomers take those jobs instead. Maury jobs. We can make announcements as well. That's so cool. Who is Sheila and how do I post? I worked in a botanical park before. I lived in the countryside until a year ago. I know a lot of crops. Another person looked at the dazed person beside him. Did you come from a pottery family? This was a scene that happened all over the small population. In any case, the fact that the territory was hiring, whether or not they even applied, was enough to stabilize their hearts. After all, this meant that the territory had plans, and that their lives could only get better from here. That in and of itself was reassuring enough. Chapter 94, Drake. Althea smiled at the energized atmosphere all throughout the territory. However, she knew that the splurge of announcements wasn't over yet. Following the economy, it was time to improve the territory's military might. The reason why economy came first was that the sentries and the wall had been providing them with enough protection. She had decided to improve people's spurts first. She also preferred thinking about money than military affairs any day. If her husband was here, she could throw this problem to him and not care about it anymore. But he wasn't, so she could only adjust. As she relaxed, she mused as to how to handle this issue when she didn't know anything. At this thought, a familiar face appeared in her head. Drake. Her husband was not here, but there was someone who knew no less about these issues. It was still someone they could trust. With a smile, she stood up and went to knock on the opposite door. She knocked a few times before the gate opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with a bun hairstyle. She remembered that she came with Mathilda's team back then. Her name was Belinda, and back in Terran she used to be an antique appraiser, which was an unfortunately useless job to have at this time. For now anyway, Althea for one never thought any skill was useless. Althea smiled at her. "May I see Auntie?" "Of course," the other woman said, letting her in. "She's in the veranda." "Thank you," Althea said, entering with a smile. Because the layout of farm villas were similar, Althea didn't need guidance to get to the older woman. When she entered, she saw Mathilda was sitting on the veranda on her rocking chair. Baron got quite a lot of talented people in a day, staring blankly into space. Althea stopped herself from making any more noise. She didn't say anything for a while, wondering how she'd give the woman some pastime to distract her from worrying excessively for her children. At the moment, Mathilda's livelihood was a landlord, in which she rented out rooms to her former companions. This meant she had too much time in her hands, and therefore too much time to fret about how her children were. After a while, Althea finally decided to knock on the already opened door, to catch the woman's attention. "Good afternoon, Auntie." The older woman's face warmed from her previous blank expression. "Come sit," she said, pointing at the opposite rocking chair. Althea nodded and relaxed, and the two were silent for a while after that, simply appreciating the peace and each other's silent company. After a while, Mathilda finally spoke, turning her head a little to Althea's direction. "Is there anything you need, child?" She mumbled, eyes closed as she rocked back and forth in the chair. She then stilled and opened her eyes, looking at the elder. "Auntie, may I borrow Drake?" Mathilda's eyebrows rose in interest, and Althea went on to explain. "I'm planning to form a guard team, but most people only had the mandatory military training at school. I hope to hire him as an instructor." Mathilda paused, looking at her in surprise, but not even a moment later, she nodded in approval. Althea blinked. "So easy." Mathilda saw her daze and chuckled. "If he's willing, he can do whatever he wants. He's done enough for me." Mathilda paused. "I had already told him this as early as when we entered the territory. It's a good way to force him around young, beautiful women. He ought to fix that excessive selective shyness of his, or he would never get a wife." The two women laughed at the man's expense, sharing stories they had heard about his embarrassments. "Poor Drake. Oh, it's hard too." About a few hundred meters from the wall, a certain woman-shy man sneezed. It wasn't that he was afraid of women in general, but only young, beautiful ones. He vaguely remembered as a kid, he was adorable and didn't speak much, and he happened to come upon a rowdy group of young girls who pinched him and patted his head. They were smiling as they surrounded him, blowing compliments, endless compliments with their high-pitched voices. It terrified him. Anyway, this issue had never hindered his work before, so he never really got his way around it. But now, "Drake, am I doing this correctly?" One woman, a ginger named Jonah, waved her sword in the air, trying to show him a technique he showed the group before. He froze, nodding blankly. Then there was a black-haired woman with sun-kissed skin, Yen, who appeared right beside the Jonah. She showed her own sword skills, much flashier than Jonah, who rolled her eyes in response. "It's like this, right, Drake?" she said, smiling brightly with heavy blush on her face. Drake gulped, freezing, not knowing what to do. To be honest, he'd rather face a mob of monsters than these two women. Drake, help! Someone from his team called, as he was being attacked by 3 monsters, and Drake was improperly relieved of the news. He sprinted there and he worked together with his team and dealt with the monsters, gaining some of the experience, occasionally giving some deserving people the last hit. Soon it stabilized enough that he only weakened the monsters, and the others dealt with the rest. He watched by for a couple of minutes until he heard a familiar ding inside his head. Ding, the village system detected that you are suitable for military instructor. Do you accept? Yes, no. Job, military instructor. Wages, 3 silver day. Benefits, 1 basic weapon every month. 10% off to all system items. Free residency during the hired period. Drake paused in his movements, but his peripheral view saw a level 3 monster incoming. He temporarily put this issue aside and resumed his killings. Later, he ran to the other side of the field to rescue another one. Looking at the grateful looks of his temporary party, he just nodded with a blank expression. When the situation finally settled down, with them reaching the scope of the sentries, he finally had the time to study the new notifications. He wiped the sweat running down his cheek, low-key avoiding the women trying to do it for him. He opened his panel again, and many thoughts were running inside his head. There was even a voice echoing. It was Mathilda's, and he recalled their conversation just a few hours after they settled down. Drake, this is no longer the old world. You are no longer my employee, but a partner. Your small disability should have been improved by your upgrades, right? Don't you want to focus on that? You loved being a soldier, didn't you? He looked at the floating question asking him if he wanted the job. With eyes filled with renewed determination, he clicked yes. Announcement: the village system has determined that Drake Leslie is eligible to be the temporary trainer of the guards. Announcement: the territory is hiring people to guard the territory and clear out monsters in the vicinity. Requirement: men and women aged 18-50. Physical 30 or above. Overall potential C or above. Wages 100 copper day. Benefits: 1 basic weapon every month. Free residency during the hired period. Limitations: 0-30 people. Please submit your resume at the village center. That's amazing, Drake, Yen said, smiling with Jonah closely beside her. Congratulations, they yelled together, trying to one-up the other with their soft voices. Drake froze, nodding, and he scurried away. Poor Drake. With that announcement, people once again flooded the village center, making their CVs beautiful so they could get the job. Along the way, the citizens also sold their forages, increasing the average number of transactions in the village center by another bulk. Sitting peacefully next to Mathilda, Althea suddenly got a notification. Triggered village center upgrade tasks. 1,000 successful transactions. Times 1,000 gold transactions, 761,000. Althea's eyebrows raised in interest. Oh, she wondered what would happen when she upgraded. She had a feeling it was going to be very good. Chapter 95, Rice. Althea looked at the announcement with interest. Obviously, the gold transactions here referred to both purchase and selling. After all, it had only been a few days. In any case, she estimated that she'd be able to upgrade the village center in a day or 2. But Althea had a feeling. She had a feeling that the protection period was an integral time to gain strength. She simply could not wait around for a day. Who knew, what if she made a miscalculation and found out that month was actually shorter than in Terran? What would she do then? Who knew what kind of alien time system this place had in place? She would never ever place her new home and family at risk for such carelessness again. Thinking for a bit, she decided to fast-track it a little. How to increase the number of transactions? Trade, of course. The village hall could buy and sell using platforms by making announcements, and this wasn't limited to the Lord. As such, in order to increase the transactions, she sent out gathering missions with root undamaged plants at a higher price under her own name. Another advantage of doing this was the fact that the village center had a similar function to her assessment skill. That was, when a trade was made through the little tables in the building, stats and uses would appear, allowing people to be able to study the trades better. She reckoned the building's assessment skill would not be limited by the level of the item like it did hers, which was why she thought the building was better. In this way, both parties could estimate the value and allow the transactions to be more clear-cut. It was worth noting that this was only applicable for the trade function, and not the selling function, where the plants went straight to the warehouse. Of course, the territory not only enjoyed 10% tax on all transactions, but the trade itself had a small fee of 1 silver to 10, depending on the mass of the items traded. In a sense, sending out trading announcements would get her rebates. Satisfied with the setup, she went home to finally get her rest. That night in her new bed, using the washed duvet they took from the hotel, she lied down comfortably and looked at her warehouse. It was a new habit of hers that was both cumbersome and very, very fun. It was like unboxing a delivery she didn't know the components of. She was perusing through the space with her mind, counting that a good part of the floor had already been occupied by various plants. Fortunately, the stone and wood automatically entered the resource space, which counted as her usable resource during construction. Otherwise, they would definitely occupy her territory space, without leaving her enough area for everything else. She roughly arranged the items with her mind, a very useful feature of the warehouse. It was fortunate she could do so, otherwise she might give birth due to overexertion. Just like this, several plants magically floated around and landed on their designated piles. The dried plants on one place, the seeds on another one, and replantable plants on yet another. Hopefully, the cabinets she ordered from Baron's team arrived soon so she could better organize the warehouse. She also ordered some wide-threaded ladders so she could easily access the top shelves without straining herself. Don't look at her climbing fences and jumping tree to tree a few days prior, but she was really feeling the heaviness now. After she leveled up, in fact, which was weird because she should have gotten stronger instead. She was making a note of each plant, most of which were already familiar to her, an unsurprising fact because of the lack of diversity in this place. However, there were one or two that seemed new, or at least a variant of other plants, and she put those aside for study. She also put aside the ones that could still be planted, deciding to take them out tomorrow. Anyway, the warehouse had an improved fresh-keeping function, so her new plants would not die immediately, even if they were out of the soil for a day. But just before she pulled her mind back, her peripheral saw a long sheaf of bluish-green plants. She didn't see them before because they were pushed to the corner of the room, but now that it was relatively clear, the plants attracted her eyes, and she curiously moved her attention towards them. She walked to the sheaf and stared at it for so long that she suddenly felt a shift, and she looked around, wondering what changed. She walked closer and heard footsteps. She stopped and the sound also stopped. You know, because she entered with her mind, there should be no sound at all. She blinked at a thought but restrained her excitement. She lifted up an item to see if her physical body was really here, and to her surprise, it really was. This meant she could teleport to the warehouse. How magical. This building was too worth it. Clearing her throat to calm herself down, she finally took a closer look at the plant she was holding. It had vibrant blue-green leaves that gently swayed with her movements. The most intriguing feature had to be the tear-shaped panicles themselves. They were elongated and gracefully drooping, bearing clusters of grains, unlike the terran with components on top of the stem. It also smelled a little nutty, unlike the earthly aroma of their terran crop. She took out her portable lab from her space, studying its composition, making sure her theory was correct. Soon the line of data appeared, and the more data showed up on the screen, the brighter her eyes got. She still hadn't recovered from her discovery with the warehouse, and another pleasant surprise came. It was a good day, she should make it a holiday. She raised the sheaf up, looking at it with obsession. Rice. She finally found it. Chapter 96, The Farmers. 25 days of protection period. The first day of various job openings started, and a lot were quite unsure of what to expect. There were some who were already quite shocked almost as soon as they timed in. The hired farmers couldn't help but stare at the beautiful pregnant woman in front of them, a stupid-looking dog with a perennial smiley face right beside her. She was the boss of their farmers. Where was the stereotypical burly farming boss with a booming voice that they expected? Althea only smiled at their dazed looks and began to explain the scope of their work. These 10 farms would be dealing with local plants necessary for human consumption. You should be familiar with this plant, she said, raising a sheaf very common in the area. This is locally known as the flute plant. On Terran, it should be close to wheat. The 10 people looked at each other in surprise. It was a common plant, and they sold everything to the village center. We will be planting these, and also breed it in a way that would improve its quality and output. That's amazing. I didn't know that was how it was used for. Althea allowed them to chat a bit as she released another sheaf and held it up on her left hand. They stared at it very curiously. If the previous one was equivalent to wheat, this one. This is a plant similar to another essential crop. Her ability didn't name it, so this was one of the undiscovered plants. We'll just call it rice. The 10 people brightened at this. Rice. Yes, but it's still an experimental crop, because we don't really know exactly how this strain differs from what we know. Also, don't ask me where I found them. A teammate got lost and brought it back, but it's probably within the territory. I analyzed it and determined it had a strong likeliness with wild rice. She didn't speak for a while after that, letting the farmers absorb the information with bright expressions. Wheat and rice, both very, very important crops which they didn't think they'd even encounter in this place, let alone propagate themselves. She observed them all, and her eyes zoned in on one man advanced in age, who had the brightest eyes of them all. This man's name was Gru Gilbert, and she knew of him from his 100 of theses. Gru was an agricultural expert, who was teaching agriculture in the top university in an adjacent country. He was near them because he was in Eden doing a seminar when the disaster happened. She first knew of him from science magazines. He was also a green-tagged talent who probably just arrived. To think he'd end up a farmer. Your name is Gru, yes? Yes, boss. I know you, you're an agricultural expert, known best for the doubling of the production of the Vivi plant. Vivi plant was a rare plant required in cancer treatment. Not many people outside the field were interested in this though. Gru knew this and looked at her deeply. May I know your name, boss? Althea Witt. The man gaped, disbelieving, but shook his head in the end. His old face brightened and extended his hand. It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Witt. I have long heard of your name. Likewise, she said with a smile, it would be a waste of your talent to just farm. Ah, no, I'm happy with living like a human being again. She smiled at the humble old man. She liked him already. You will be in charge of this. Increase your salary by 20 copper. The old man gaped at her, and she continued to speak with a smile. You can plant these seeds with different conditions. Report to me what is the most productive. Thank you, boss. This is actually wronging you. Your skill set could be much more useful somewhere else. It's my honor to study this, Ms. Althea. It has been a while since I've been excited. While the other farmers looked at him in envy, someone had a more far-sighted brain and looked at Althea. Hesitating for a moment, he gathered his courage to ask, Boss, if you don't mind us asking, how much were the fields? You can't really buy the standalone fields. It's just rented out, only at 50 silver per month, and 10% tax is automatically deducted. The farmers looked hopeful. Only 10 people were hired this time, so their teammates could still get some, but they hesitated on reacting. After all, wasn't this just thinking of doing your own competing business after leaving your boss? Althea laughed at their expressions. Don't worry, you or your respective teams can rent your own farmlands. As long as you produce efficiently and don't take my stuff, I don't mind. Gru couldn't help but admire Althea. Only less than 2 days, and she had already figured out so much about the territory. Gru was very thick-skinned and didn't hide his thoughts at all. As expected of Ms. Althea, always so amazing. His teammate Dennis, a farmer he met on the way here, rolled his eyes and couldn't take this prideful guy's groveling appearance. He stepped forward and looked at Althea eagerly. Then, can we buy seeds from you, boss? Althea blinked for a moment and smiled. After the first harvest, sure. Everyone were relieved and very, very happy. Thanks, boss, they exclaimed, very inspired, and they worked even harder farming than they ever thought they would. For the next half day, Althea watched the 10 people passionately fill up a couple of fields with the wheat and rice seeds according to her requirements. There were some differences in their methodologies, like their spacing, the depth of the seeds, etc. However, with the blessing of the system farms, she was confident most of them would grow well. She could already imagine the beautiful upright sheaths following the wind, signifying the promise of a great lifestyle ahead. How nice. Chapter 97, Prelude to Upgrades. Boss sister Atilda. Althea turned to look at two dumplings running towards her with their little legs, propelling them forward with their boundless energy. Fufi had already bolted some time ago and was now running alongside them. Maya was ambling towards her with Theo in hand. They had bright smiles on their chubby cheeks, and the adults, the farmers and their helpers, who saw them couldn't help but watch them fondly. With the current situation and the tragedy everyone went through, even if the kids stood motionless for an hour, there would be someone to dote on them. Even if it was visualizing the children they lost on them, there would definitely be someone tearing up in the vicinity. There were also animal lovers, with the survival rate of domestic animals even worse than children. There was definitely no lack of people spoiling Fufi. He had gained a lot of weight, and she swore to get someone to train him soon so he didn't get too unhealthy. Althea looked beyond them and saw there wasn't anyone behind the children. Seeing that they were alone running around the territory, Althea knew that the adults had already started working on their respective tasks. Fortunately, the territory was very safe, and any damage or danger to residents would actually alert the authorities, i.e. currently, just the Lord or Drake, whom she assigned as such. All dangerous flora, fauna and insects were also expelled in the area when she created her territory. She found this out when Sheila no longer applied her insect repellent and asked permission to sell only to people going outside instead. "Children," she said, patting their little heads as they entered her arm's length. "Do you want to watch them farm?" she asked, head pointing at the hardworking men and women who were occasionally looking in their direction. "Are they farming now?" Maya looked on with interest. "Like what me and Papa did in the house?" "Yes," she smiled. "It is indeed very similar to what you did yesterday." "What are we planting?" "Rice and wheat. The beef rice meal you like so much couldn't happen without these." "Ooh," Maya said, fascinated. Theo also had his mouth with an O shape, showing off his shaky front tooth, also expressing his feelings. It was adorable. The group of four walked around the fields with interest, and she introduced the kids to the friendly farmers. Of course, kids will be kids, so they did eventually get bored. Seeing this, Althea smiled and looked to a direction, to the undeveloped area of the territory. "Shall we walk around the forests?" And of course, the kids agreed with glee, and they, including Fufi, bounced about as they followed Althea to the nearby forests. The perks of underdeveloped territory was that resources were everywhere, and it was safe. For now, while the population was still small, she didn't limit the harvesting of resources within the walls too much, at least for now. The refresh rate was amazing anyway. She'd just add the rule of prohibiting taking the roots. Although it was difficult for her to lean down, the two children were very good and helped her. She taught them some basic knowledge on how to handle the digging, and how to make sure every harvest was sustainable in the process. Surprisingly, Theo's pickup was even better than Maya. Too bad he couldn't speak, otherwise he'd have been asking a lot of questions now. "Can you get me that, Maya?" she asked, as she distracted the kids to handle a safe plant. This was because next to them, she saw an unknown pink plant attached to a tree like a fig. She was afraid the children would touch it accidentally. She had already analyzed with her skillet and saw its use. Soft Vine LV2 Muscle Relaxant. Not only could this be used in medicine, but there was also a more important use, for her anyway. But touching it could have a few side effects. She took out her gloves and took some samples, for use as well as to replant and propagate back home. The moment they got back home, she went to the kitchen and walking to Harold, who was preparing some ingredients for their next meal. "Boss." She handed a basket of pinkish plants and placed them on the counter. "Try to soften monster meat with this. We can't be dependent on your pressure cooker forever. Especially, it wouldn't be able to handle the amount of orders when the restaurant opened." As she pointed at the plants, she looked at him with a mysterious smile. "Try not to handle too much barehanded though, lest your muscles soften too much." "What?" "Mix it when you marinate, but don't soak your hands on it." "Oh, okay," Harold said, blinking, the use of the thing slowly dawning on him. When it did, his shoulders immediately tensed in excitement. "Let's try it for dinner," Harold said, excitedly handling the meat and marinated it with the new plant. "Of course." Because it was new, he also experimented in the concentration with varying success. When the meat was served that dinner, everyone pretty much drooled. Today's meat dish was stormed to a meat stew. There was a combination of vegetables and herbs, vouchsafed by Althea, with a scent that permeated the air. The meat was tender morsels that oozed of fragrance, begging to be chewed. When it entered their mouths, the meat melted and their eyes shut as they appreciated the taste. Indeed, the meat served was even better than before. It had a special floral aroma to it that fit well with the traditional taste of meat. She also tested the dish, and there weren't any volatile reactions at all. If anything, it blended really well with the other ingredients. Dinner was sumptuous, and that night's rest was estimated to be particularly nice. And it was made even happier, because Althea finally received her long-awaited notification. Detected, conditions for upgrading Village Center had been met. Would you like to upgrade? Chapter 98, Upgraded. The team had been lounging in their new living room after that sumptuous meal when a ding sounded in Althea's ears. 1,000 gold transactions confirmed. Althea was not surprised. After all, the farms had been rented now, a lot of stone and wood resources had been exchanged, and including the order she made under her name, there were plenty of transactions that happened in one day. 1,000 successful transactions. 1,000 gold transactions, 1,003,1000. Detected, conditions for upgrading Village Center had been met. Would you like to upgrade for 500 wood, 300 stone, and 800 gold? Later. Good lord, this upgrade was thrice as expensive than building one from scratch. Looking painfully at her rapidly disappearing resources, she pressed yes. She decided that luxury purchases like custom houses would require not only gold, but also wood and stone resources. Milk the rich people well. She opened the window, and except for the 2 more purchase slots and a new rules and regulations tab, there seemed to have no change. One must know that they could make some simple prohibitions even at level 1, for a price. For example, no fight, no theft, etc. If it occurred, and alert her or whoever she assigned to implement the rules, like Derek, and they would handle it from there. So what was the difference with the new tab? A bit disappointed, she decided to see the building for herself, making the others stare at follow her movements. Where are you going, boss? Village Center is updated, she just said, but it was enough for everyone to stand up and leave whatever they had been doing. They arrived at the updated building a few minutes later, and they could hear the chatter around. I saw a building grow on its own. It was like magic. Can buildings just get taller by themselves? Maybe like those infrastructure games I used to play. Walking past the crowd, they finally got closer. It was now twice as large and twice as imposing. Inside, the area was enlarged with more platforms and surfaces. There was also an additional marble counter in the other end, with no platforms on the way from the door towards it. There was also a staircase on both sides of this empty concierge. They saw a few people climbing up excitedly to see what was inside. Unfortunately, they seemed to be stopped by an invisible wall. It's forbidden, someone mumbled in disappointment, swiping around like a mime. Nope, if there's an opening, I can't find it. Another one stepped in next to him, doing different movements, looking no less idiotic. Disappointed, the man's shoulder slumped, me neither. Another sigh, let's just go. Althea, who had been watching their exchange, frowned. If she wanted to hide her identity, did it mean she had to watch out for people before going to the second floor every time? Is anything the matter? Sheila asked, and she shook her head. I'll tell you later, she whispered, and the team went back to their base with a lot of questions. Althea, though, was distracted the whole way. If only I could teleport, she mused. For a while the issue dampened her mood. But then she remembered, she could indeed teleport, albeit it was teleport to the warehouse. Well, good enough. Later that night, Althea excitedly went to the warehouse. There had been a lot of changes since the last time. There were now rows and rows of cabinets from Baron. The warehouse now looked similar to the supermarkets back in Terran. She walked past these and went to the end, where the warehouse connected to the village center. She opened her lord window and went to the building tabs. Paying a couple of gold, she added a mezzanine and a staircase. This way she also not only gets access, but she also maximized the space. Building a door on the connecting wall, she turned the knob with a bit of anticipation in her heart. What could be on the other side of the door that only the Lord could get in? But on the second floor there was nothing. Later, her lips pursed and she entered, looking around more carefully. Then she looked down on her feet, and her peripheral view saw a pattern nearby. She studied the floor and saw a faint, but pretty, circular pattern in the center of the room. It was made of a complex symbol that exuded some sort of power. There were concentric circles and curves, with these complex curves creating an intricate pattern connecting these circles. Her pretty eyebrows furrowed as she slowly walked over the aforementioned pattern, walking above it. Ding! Would you like to spend a one-time fee of 100 gold to open the portal for specially hired work? Note: 1 monthly salaries are paid separately. 2. At level 2 village rank, a maximum of 1 person a day can be hired. 3. The summoned person reserves the right to agree to the hiring process. 4. 3 attempts are allowed daily. 5. Hired individuals are duty-bound to complete the scope of their tasks, according to their job descriptions. 6. Hired individuals are not slaves, and will not endanger their lives for the territory. They are only required to do what is within their ability, and are allowed to flee as needed. 7. Territories cannot force a hired individual to commit acts they are not willing to do. 8. Hired individuals may also choose to apply extension of their tenure. 9. Lords can terminate a hiring deal, but the initial hiring payment for that month would not be refunded. Note: hired individuals are contract locked to never be able to do any harm to the territory. Even upon the end of their tenure, hired individuals will not be able to disclose anything related to the territory. She blinked. Hired individuals. Do they appear above the circle, like a game of sort? Then she paused at a realization, eyes bright in curiosity. Could this be the legendary NPC? Chapter 99, First NPC. As interested as she was, though, she didn't say yes immediately. Even with all these odd alien elements, she still knew that this wasn't a game at all, where people had many lives and NPCs were guaranteed to be harmless. Even if there was an explicit note saying they couldn't do any harm to the territory, there was no mention of protection of the individual. She might be much stronger than other Terrans, but who knew what would come out of this teleportation circle? Her brain couldn't help but imagine a couple of scenarios that she really didn't like. She cringed at the thought of zombies appearing all of a sudden, asking them to hire her with those creepy groans of theirs. She shook her head and stared at the circle again in ponder. Her lips were pursed, before finally approaching it again. While risky, a lot of good things tended to come from risk. Not to mention, thinking about how the universe system had always been objective and helpful, it would be such a pity to pass on this opportunity, because she was afraid. In the end, she decided to take a small leap of faith, and throw down a whooping 100 gold. There was an option on not hiring anyway, she might as well study the options first. Yes. Minus 100 gold. She watched as lighting from the pattern glowed, and followed the lines outwards, remaining lit up indefinitely. Would you like to open the portal for 1 silver, 1-3? Yes. Minus 1 silver. Soon a holographic image of a man appeared, looking dazedly at the screen. Althea could help but appreciate the magical technology before anything. The closest thing she could describe it was, like the game panel, a holographic image of sorts, which, by the way, was still being perfected in Terran. At the same time, however, it was not quite a hologram. It had a more airy and translucent feel to it, more like the air itself was condensing to produce a colored image. It was very magical. It was only at this time that she finally took a moment to look closely at the person. He was quite tall. He was plain-looking but had soft features. He also had a semi-bald head that was more pronounced on the side. He also had an apprehensive expression on his face, which was a little amusing. Anyway, Althea moved on and shifted to look at his stats. His name, Madonlu. Level E. Abilities, production of low-level weapons. Wage, 10 gold per month. Confirm, yes, no, 1-3. Production of low-level weapons. Her eyes brightened. Did it mean this person could produce weapons that damaged the monsters here? The wooden swords, bows and arrows, etc. that could do similar damage with their Terran guns. However, She pressed no in the end. She already had a weapons shop, there was no need for this. She could only hire one a day, what if there were better options at the back? However, this overlap between building and person did make her curious. If she hired an NPC, would they be able to replace the use of a building? Then she looked at the hologram again, deep in thought. She wondered how would she see the next option. First she tried to swipe the image to the left, though the image only broke to pretty dust-like particles that recondensed to form the image. She thought for a moment and uttered, "Next," and the image broke down. "Would you like to open the portal for 1 silver, 2, 3? "Yes." The image of a 6 feet tall old man appeared. It seemed that everyone that appeared would be around or taller than this height. Even a crunched old man was taller than the typical Terran man. Name: Crutch Bendon. Level D. Abilities: production of low to mid-level armors. Wage: 15 gold per month, food twice a day inclusive. Confirm: 2, 3. This time she said yes. Somehow, she doubted the next one would have a higher level. Judging by the logic of the system, it was likely that the better quality NPCs would be available upon leveling up. Naturally, she wanted the best for her territory. Of course, their monthly costs also increased. When she made her choice, the light from the circle projected upwards, creating a light curtain. When the light dimmed, the same old man appeared within the magic circle. Teleportation. Oh my goodness, while she didn't know what to expect exactly, this was a bit shocking to witness. However startled she was though, Althea didn't show anything on her face. The old man, on the other hand, was stunned when he saw her. It was only for a moment and he quickly caught himself and kneeled down. "My lord." "Get up," Althea hurriedly said. "Just call me Althea." The old man gaped, looking aghast. "That isn't customary, my lord. People here don't know I'm the lord, so please treat me like the others." Crutch looked at her in incomprehension, not understanding why she did so. Althea sighed and opened up her game panel, deciding where to place him at. It just so happened that one of the new shops along the main commercial area hadn't been rented yet. She took down its availability. "There's a house on this address. The ground floor is for chimerical, the upper floor could be your sleeping quarters." The man stared at her, confused. "It's not an armory, my lord." "Is there a difference, I mean with what you would produce, than what a building could?" Crutch seemed to be at a loss, as if he didn't think about this issue at all. "Not much, but our existence doubles the productivity of a building, at the minimum. That's all I know. I apologize, my lord." Althea was relieved. It meant she wasn't wrong. A pity for the productivity, but who told her building slots to be filled up? Anyway, to some, NPCs could, indeed, replace buildings. "It's fine, you helped me a lot," she said, and the old man looked so honored Althea thought he'd have bowed if she didn't stop him. At the same time, she thought of how other Terrans would choose in her position. They would probably opt to buy buildings instead of hiring NPCs. The one-time cost of a typical commercial building was only 50 to 100 gold, and you could produce unlimited amounts as long as one gave the raw materials. This was in contrast to the NPCs, which were paid 10 gold a month at the cheapest, and their productivity would definitely not be unlimited. She couldn't tell which would upgrade faster either, so her choice actually had a number of risks. But well, each to their own, she still believed in her intuition. Chapter 100, Second NPC. "My lord," Clutch looked at her warily, and Althea crossed her arms as she stared at him. He was shaking a bit, obviously intimidated. Her eyebrows furrowed. "Am I scary?" "I know, yes." "What?" "Whatever my lord says is correct. Just treat me casually. I'll be angry if people find out about me because of your attitude." She said so with faux sternness. What she didn't expect was that he would look like he was about to cry the moment she said it. Her eyes twitched, not dwelling on it anymore. Obviously, the status of the lord in this world was relatively high, which was mostly a relief. Another interesting thing was that NPCs seemed to be speaking another language. However, she could understand it clearly, as if there was an automatic translation in her head. Of course, their way of speaking was a little different, but her brain could just translate it in a way they would easily understand. She looked at the man who was still looking down, not meeting her eyes. "Can I ask, my words, are they in your language?" She knew the question was weird, but she didn't know how to ask, "Do you understand the language I'm using?" when he obviously could. Surprisingly, the old man really understood. He shook his head. "No, your language is strange. Your territory must be far from mine." "I see, thank you," she said after a pause. "You go to the place I told you about. Good night." Thank you, my lord," he said, bowed, and walked out the door, gently shutting it. Althea couldn't help but stare at the door, recalling the man's reaction to the question. So everyone, including Aborigines, had an automatic translator in their heads. She shrugged and yawned, sleepy. She'd think about that later on. The mid-morning of the following day, Althea went back to the second floor to summon another NPC. The only difference was that there was an additional set of couches and coffee tables on the corner, Rush ordered from Baron's team, making them the first citizens to enter the second floor, though not before signing an NDA, just because. She took out some snacks and milk prepared by Harold. Yesterday she wanted to have a chat with the old guy, but she was very pregnant and tired, so she passed. This time she made sure of her comfort. She opened the portals again and took a look at her options. Unfortunately, she didn't take the first two, one of which was a level E armor maker, and another one didn't have a skill that she'd want in her territory. The woman's ability was to serve, and judging by her revealing dress and the constant winking and sexy poses of her holographic avatar, it was probably that type of serving. The last one was also a woman, but she had a stronger aura and short hair. His name's Brenda Walker. Level D. Abilities: production of low to mid-level weapons. Wage: 15 gold per month, food twice a day inclusive. Confirm: 3-3. Finally seeing a decent option, she heaved a sigh of relief and clicked yes. A familiar burst of light lit up the room, soon revealing the live version of the image. It was a pretty woman with a strong but curvaceous figure. It was just that there was a huge burn scar on the lower side of her face, disfiguring her otherwise pretty face. The woman bowed, not daring to look at her. "My lord." She repeated her instructions with crutch, and the woman looked at her with a similarly baffled expression. Althea didn't bother with her reaction anymore and went straight to the point. "You will be assigned to my weaponry shop," she told her. "It's just that it's only level 1. It won't affect your level of production, will it?" The woman raised her head, as if surprised to hear her voice. No, miss, but working in a weapons shop will increase my productivity." "Do you know why?" she asked, curious. Perhaps she could figure out an alternative to these buildings. Weaponry stores have production rooms accessible only to the workers and the lord. This working room includes all the tools we need to work well. We also get a special increase in these rooms, increasing our rate of success and efficiency, depending on the level of the building. Althea nodded, taking note. It seemed that she would still need to consider adding an armory in the future, though it would really depend on the situation. Weaponry stores also have accommodations. Yes, a level 1 store can accommodate up to 2 employees. Do these building buffs apply only NPCs? I mean, people hired like you are. The woman seemed a little confused with her question. And Althea realized that this seemed to be a common-sense question. "We lived in a secluded area before. We are unaware of the situation of the continent." She cleared her throat. The term buffs are used to refer to quality or productivity increase awarded by, say, a building. Brenda nodded in understanding. As long as the Lord hires someone, regardless of in person or through the village center, they can enjoy the same buffs. She nodded, relieved. "Where are you from? Do you have family?" "I live with my father in Glaston Town." "Where is that?" "It's 100 kilometers from the center of the human territory," she said, a bit proud. After all, the closer to the center, the less likely they will be noticed by surrounding races, and thus safer and better developed. Althea was very interested to hear about the outside world. "Oh, you seem very proud of your home." Brenda touched her nose in embarrassment. "Well, it's more on the development of the territory." She mentioned the relative safety from the enemy races. "Our home really did well, and a lot of it had to do with positioning. If it was a human territory attacking during the territory wars, our territory would likely handle it well." This one sentence poured cold water all over Althea's curious good mood. Her back straightened, eyebrows meeting in befuddlement. Territorial wars, humans attacking. What was this? What was it this time?